A young man is betrayed, thrown into a pit, and left for dead in a barren land. But somehow, he survives. That survival sets off a chain of events so powerful, it changes the fate of nations. Was it pure coincidence? A carefully orchestrated plan? Or something far beyond human comprehension? In the biblical narrative, Joseph's story stands as one of the most dramatic accounts of betrayal, resilience, and redemption. But one question remains at the heart of his journey. What truly saved Joseph from that deadly pit? Was it his brother's last-minute compassion? A dry well that just happened to be empty at the right time? Or could this event signal something far deeper, a divine hand guiding events behind the scenes? Today, we'll unravel the mystery hidden in that forgotten desert pit. We'll explore historical clues, scientific insights, and ancient traditions to ask, was Joseph's survival merely the result of chance, or the first sign of a supernatural blueprint in action? Joseph's story doesn't begin with a miracle. It begins with a dream. A 17-year-old boy, gifted with visions of the future, dares to share them with brothers who already despise him. His words stir jealousy, his father's favoritism adds fuel to the fire, and his multicolored tunic becomes a symbol of division. While Jacob saw potential, his other sons saw a threat. The family's fragile balance teetered on the edge of violence. One day, the tension reaches its breaking point. Joseph is sent alone to find his brothers, far from home, wandering in the fields of Shechem and Dothan. What should have been a simple visit becomes a planned ambush. The sight of Joseph approaching in the distance ignites dark intentions. Here comes the dreamer, they sneer. Their minds entertain murder, a swift end to their frustrations. But one voice rises above the mob. Reuben. Let's not shed blood, he pleads. Throw him into this pit in the wilderness. A strange suggestion. Not mercy, not cruelty, but something in between. The pit was deep, dark, and empty. No water, no escape. A prison of stone and silence. Yet that emptiness becomes Joseph's salvation. Why was the pit dry? In a region where underground cisterns stored rainwater for survival, a bone-dry well was an anomaly. Some scholars argue it was a seasonal drought. Others suggest the pit had already collapsed or been abandoned. But for Joseph, that dry hole in the desert was not a curse. It was a lifeline. Had there been water, he would have drowned. Had Reuben not intervened, he may have been slaughtered. Every detail aligned with surgical precision. Inside the pit, Joseph's cries echo off stone walls. He calls for mercy. No one answers. Above him, his brothers eat bread. The contrast is brutal. A boy pleading for his life while his family dines with indifference. But something stirs on the horizon. A caravan of Ishmaelite traders, traveling toward Egypt, appears at the perfect moment. Not before, not after, but right when Joseph's fate hangs in limbo. Why were they there? Why that road, that day, that hour? Some historians suggest Dothan was a trade route, but many other paths existed. The odds of that specific caravan passing by, unnoticed by Joseph but not by Judah, raise compelling questions. Judah, calculating and cold, sees an opportunity. What will we gain if we kill him? Let's sell him instead. And just like that, Joseph is lifted from the pit. Not rescued, not redeemed, but transitioned into the next phase of a journey no one, not even he, understands. His brothers believe they've solved their problem. They see the pit as an obstacle, a place of hiding. But what if it was the opposite? What if the pit was protection? A moment carved out in time to delay death and redirect destiny? In that dry hole in the wilderness, Joseph's story is neither ended nor paused. It's transformed. What looked like abandonment may have been the first touch of a divine strategy. Perhaps the pit was never meant to bury him. Perhaps it was designed to prepare him. From the outside, Joseph's story looks like a string of misfortunes. A hated brother, thrown into a pit. a slave sold to strangers, a foreigner falsely accused and imprisoned. Yet somehow, despite the chaos, each setback becomes a step forward. Each downfall brings him closer to power. The deeper you go into the narrative, the harder it becomes to dismiss the pattern as mere coincidence. Let's look at the sequence. Joseph is sold to Egyptian traders. In Egypt, he's purchased by Potiphar, a high-ranking official close to Pharaoh. Within Potiphar's household, Joseph quickly rises to authority until he's framed by Potiphar's wife and thrown into prison. Even there, in confinement, he earns respect and is placed in charge of the other prisoners. Then, out of nowhere, two royal servants are imprisoned with him, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. This isn't random. It's alignment, timing, precision. Joseph interprets their dreams, accurately predicting one man's execution and another's restoration to the king's court. He asks the cupbearer to remember him. The man forgets. For 2 years. Then, when Pharaoh himself is tormented by dreams no one can interpret, the cupbearer suddenly remembers the Hebrew slave with the gift of insight. Joseph is summoned, interprets the dream, and is instantly elevated to the second highest position in Egypt. Pause for a moment. If the cupbearer had remembered Joseph immediately, he might have been freed but returned to obscurity. If Pharaoh's dream had come earlier or later, Joseph would have missed his window. But the dream comes at the exact moment Egypt needs a leader with wisdom, and Joseph is precisely positioned to step in. This is not the randomness of suffering. It's a pattern with structure, a system with signals. And it all begins at the pit. Providence, in theological terms, is the belief that events are not just guided, but intricately designed by a divine hand. But even outside religious tradition, the idea of unseen order fascinates thinkers across disciplines. In chaos theory, for example, small changes in initial conditions can lead to wildly different outcomes, a concept known as the butterfly effect. Joseph's story is the perfect case study. A single moment of hesitation from Reuben, a single empty well, a single caravan, all contributing to the rescue of millions from famine. Science can't prove divine intent, but it can analyze structure. Joseph's trajectory doesn't behave like statistical randomness. It mirrors what researchers call nonlinear causality, a web of factors that amplify one another in unpredictable but purposeful directions. What began as a family betrayal becomes a national salvation, not by Joseph's control, not by anyone's plan, and yet not without direction. Philosophers argue that human life often swings between two great forces, chaos and meaning. We look for patterns because deep inside, we sense they must exist. And Joseph's story dares us to ask, what if they really do? What if suffering has shape? What if delay is design? The pit, in retrospect, was not a trap. It was a gate. A strange, dusty corridor between childhood and calling. Joseph's fall into the ground was not his end, but the start of a path governed by invisible geometry. His every move echoes a principle the ancients believed deeply, that fate is not chaos, but code. Even Joseph, when finally elevated, begins to understand. Speaking to his brothers years later, he doesn't say, "You saved me." He doesn't say, "I got lucky." He says, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." It's a declaration of design, an insight that suffering can be purposeful, even when orchestrated by human cruelty. The deeper we go into Joseph's life, the clearer the lines become. The pit was not random. The traders were not random. Egypt was not random. And if none of that was random, perhaps neither is your story. The architecture of providence does not always appear in real time. But when we look back just like Joseph, we may see that the hand we thought had abandoned us had been guiding us all along. It's easy to focus on the dramatic moments. Joseph being sold, the caravan arriving, the dream interpreted before Pharaoh. But buried deep within this story is a moment easily overlooked, and yet perhaps the most revealing of all. The time Joseph spent inside the pit, silent, motionless, forgotten. This moment, the space between betrayal and transaction, is filled with nothing. No voices, no angels, no miracles, just silence. The pit becomes a strange symbol of abandonment, of divine absence, of delay. But what if that silence speaks louder than we think? In many ancient traditions, the concept of divine timing is inseparable from waiting. The Hebrew scriptures are filled with stories of individuals stuck in waiting rooms of destiny. Abraham waiting for a son, Moses waiting in the desert, David waiting for a crown. Joseph's pit is another iteration of that waiting. He is placed in a sealed, motionless place where he cannot act, cannot escape, and cannot even plead his case. Science tells us that periods of rest are not wasted. In biology, dormancy is essential for survival. Seeds must remain underground in darkness before breaking through the soil. The pit then becomes Joseph's place of internal germination, a sacred delay, a moment where nothing seems to happen on the surface, but transformation is beginning in the depths. Consider the psychological aspect. Joseph, at 17, had been favored, celebrated, and even idolized by his father. He had dreams of dominance, of grandeur, and likely pride. But inside the pit, none of those things matter. He is stripped not just of his tunic, but of his identity. This forced isolation becomes a brutal mirror. His dreams may have been real, but was he ready for them? Here lies the paradox. The pit is both punishment and preparation. It doesn't end his story. It rewrites it. Silence, in this case, is not God's absence. It's God's strategy. A divine pause that clears away the noise of ego and fear to make room for something greater. In many faith traditions, God often speaks not in thunder, but in silence. Not in motion, but in stillness. But what about the brothers? Their choice to sit down and eat after throwing Joseph into the pit is chilling. While Joseph trembles in darkness, they break bread in the sun. This contrast forces a harsh question. Where is justice? Why does the wicked prosper while the innocent suffer in silence? It's a question that echoes through history. We see it in our world, constantly wrongdoers walking free, while the righteous suffer. But Joseph's pit reminds us that silence is not surrender. Delay is not denial. The quiet seasons of our lives are not voids, but veil spaces where meaning is hidden until the right moment. In fact, the delay between Joseph's cry and his deliverance is what allows the caravan to arrive. Had he been pulled out too soon, the window of destiny would have closed. The silence wasn't just an absence, it was a holding pattern, a divine buffering that allowed the next scene to align. Even Reuben, who tried to save Joseph, misses his moment. He returns to the pit only to find it empty. He tears his clothes, overcome with grief, but the timeline has moved forward without him. Reuben had the right instinct, but not the right timing. And in matters of providence, timing is everything. The pit, then, is not just a symbol of suffering, it is a symbol of precision. The silence within it is not emptiness, but calibration. Like the pause before a symphony begins, like the stillness before dawn. In the still, dark place where no one could see or hear, the coordinates of Joseph's destiny were being aligned. In today's terms, the pit might resemble moments of depression, rejection, or failure. Times when we feel forgotten, unseen, buried. But Joseph's story suggests that these pits are not endings, they are intersections. The silence that surrounds us may, in fact, be the sacred space where something greater is being built, piece by piece, behind the curtain of reality. So before we curse the pit, we must ask, what if this is where purpose begins? What if silence isn't punishment, but strategy? Beneath the silence of Joseph's imprisonment lies something far more complex than mere coincidence. The story, often romanticized as divine rescue, unfolds with a precision that seems too orchestrated to be accidental. If we peel back the layers of drama and look through the lens of underlying mechanisms, psychological, cultural, and even scientific, what emerges is a pattern of survival that defies randomness. The dry well in Dothan wasn't just any pit. Archaeological findings from similar regions reveal that these cisterns were strategically placed and engineered with care. Carved into limestone, many were built with narrow necks and wide bases to retain water during the rainy seasons. But this particular one was bone dry. Topographical models suggest that Dothan's climate during that period was entering a drought cycle. So yes, naturally, the well could have been dry. But what are the odds that the one Joseph was thrown into just happened to be the one that would not drown him? Then comes timing, the silent partner of providence. A caravan of Ishmaelite traders from Gilead passed by, not days later, not hours earlier, but precisely when the brothers were debating Joseph's fate. In historical terms, these traders were likely part of a complex economic network, transporting spices and myrrh toward Egypt. Their presence, while seemingly incidental, fits into a broader geopolitical framework. Egypt's growing demand for labor, driven by dynastic expansions, made them eager buyers of foreign slaves. But what does it mean when fate and commerce meet at the crossroads of betrayal? The human mind seeks meaning in chaos. Neuroscience has long documented our tendency to find patterns in random events, a survival instinct hardwired into our cognition. But sometimes, patterns are not illusions. They are echoes of order buried beneath what looks like disorder. Joseph's story contains recurring motifs: favor followed by rejection, descent followed by elevation, silence followed by sudden intervention. These aren't just narrative devices. They are signals. In literature and psychology, Joseph is often described as an archetype, the innocent sufferer, the visionary misunderstood, the exile destined for restoration. His journey mirrors mythic structures found across civilizations: the fall into the underworld, the death of identity, the eventual resurrection into a new purpose. Could this imply that stories like Joseph's aren't rare because they are fictional, but because they represent a deeper rhythm written into the human experience? Consider Reuben again. His hesitation wasn't just fear. It may have been moral dissonance, a clash between conscience and conformity. Cognitive dissonance theory explains how individuals under social pressure may seek compromise when full rebellion feels too risky. Reuben's partial resistance, his plea for the pit instead of death, may have been the nervous system of mercy flickering inside a hostile environment. And in that moment of hesitation, a window opened. The mechanics beneath Joseph's story are more than divine or coincidental. They are structural. Decisions influenced by guilt, geography shaped by climate, timing enabled by trade routes, all converging into what looks like fate. But perhaps fate is not a force above us. Maybe it's the name we give to invisible systems working in sync, natural, emotional, historical, moving toward a conclusion we can only understand in hindsight. So was Joseph saved by a miracle? Or was he saved by a convergence of mechanisms beyond his control, but not outside the realm of cause and effect? When mercy wears the mask of timing and deliverance arrives on the back of a caravan, the boundary between heaven and human action becomes beautifully blurred. Perguntar ayon ChatGPT. Joseph's story doesn't end in the pit, nor na prasao. It rises unexpectedly into power, into leadership, into redemption. But more than just a personal victory, Joseph's ascent transforms the future of entire nations. Egypt is preserved. Canaan is saved. And the very brothers who threw him into the ground are later bowed before him in desperation. But what does this mean for us now, thousands of years later? Can an ancient pit still speak to a modern world? In times of uncertainty, whether global crises, personal failures, or institutional collapses, we often look for heroes. We look for the ones who rise, the ones who endure the fall, survived the silence, and returned stronger. Joseph's journey is not just a historical account. It's a psychological and spiritual archetype. The pattern repeats: betrayal, descent, obscurity, followed by wisdom, return, and restoration. Today, stories like Joseph's appear in different forms. The entrepreneur who loses everything but later builds an empire. The refugee who escapes war and becomes a leader in a foreign land. The child abandoned by family who grows into a protector of thousands. Though the names and places change, the pattern remains, and its roots can be traced back to a dry well in Canaan. Joseph's role in Egypt also opens doors for a conversation about leadership in times of crisis. When famine threatens the land, it is not Pharaoh's gods, armies, or advisors who save the day. It's a foreigner, a former slave, someone shaped by trauma and silence, someone forged in darkness. What qualified Joseph was not privilege, but perspective. The pit gave him that. Modern leadership often focuses on charisma, education, and social status. But Joseph's story suggests another route. Brokenness as preparation, humility as strength, strategic vision born not in classrooms, but in caves. The best leaders may be those who've already been buried, because they know what it takes to rise. And let's talk about forgiveness. When Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers, he doesn't seek revenge. He weeps. He embraces. He says the unthinkable. Do not be afraid. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. In a world driven by vengeance and bitterness, this moment of restoration is revolutionary. What if more of us lived like Joseph? What if we interpreted our own pits not as places of punishment, but of preparation? What if we saw those who wronged us not as enemies to crush, but as unwitting instruments in our story of growth? This mindset is radical, but it's the very thing that kept Joseph from becoming just another broken man with power. It made him a healer of nations. Science and faith don't often walk hand in hand, but in Joseph's case, they intersect in an undeniable rhythm. The laws of probability show that the events of his life are almost statistically impossible to align without intelligent coordination. Sociologists point to the influence of trauma in shaping resilient leaders. Psychologists talk about post-traumatic growth, where people emerge from suffering with deeper wisdom. The data only confirms what Joseph's story already reveals. There is design in pain, and from the lowest moments, greatness can rise. Finally, Joseph's journey reminds us that divine providence is not always loud or visible. Sometimes it looks like a pit. Sometimes it feels like being sold into slavery. But in hindsight, every moment clicks into place. Every delay, betrayal, and injustice becomes a doorway to something we could never have scripted ourselves. The pit, then, is not just part of the story, it's the beginning of a system, a divine sequence, a sacred code that still functions today. And maybe, just maybe, what we call coincidence is simply God choosing to remain anonymous. As we reach the final chapter of Joseph's story, we stand before a profound truth. Some events resist full explanation. The pit, the betrayal, the caravan, the rise to power. Each piece fits together with eerie precision, yet the full picture remains elusive. What guides such a story? Fate? Free will? Divine providence? Or some combination beyond our grasp? Human logic demands cause and effect, clear beginnings and endings, motives and consequences. Yet Joseph's narrative defies neat categories. His brother's cruelty, his near death in the pit, the timely arrival of strangers. These elements blend chaos and order, human intention and something greater, the natural and the supernatural. Throughout history, thinkers from philosophers to scientists have grappled with the limits of understanding. Quantum physics shows us that at the smallest levels, reality behaves unpredictably, influenced by observation and probability. Theological reflection teaches that divine action often transcends human timelines and reasoning. Joseph's story sits at the crossroads of these mysteries. Could it be that what we call miracle is simply the manifestation of a higher order beyond cause and effect? That providence weaves through human plans, sometimes hidden, sometimes revealed, but always real? Joseph's survival was never guaranteed by human effort alone. His faith, resilience, and intelligence were crucial, yes. But so were the dry pit, the passing caravan, and the delay in memory from a cupbearer. This interplay suggests that the boundaries of human control are limited. We make choices, we act, but we also move within a grander tapestry, a story not fully ours to write. In this space between certainty and mystery lies the invitation of Joseph's life. To trust not only in what we can see or prove, but in the possibility that our darkest moments are stages for a deeper purpose, that setbacks are not ends, but beginnings cloaked in shadow. For many, this is a difficult place. It challenges the notion that life is fully predictable or fully random. It asks us to embrace paradox, that we are both free agents and participants in a greater design. Joseph's pit was a real hole in the ground, but it was also a metaphor, a symbol of the human condition. We all encounter pits, moments of pain, silence, and seeming abandonment. And like Joseph, we face the choice to despair or to believe in unseen hands guiding us toward redemption. Science may never fully explain these moments. Faith may never fully solve the mysteries of timing and fate. But the story of Joseph offers hope that in the intersection of human action and divine will, there is a profound logic, a sacred rhythm that calls us to trust. As we close this journey, we are left with a question. When life pushes you into your own pit, will you see it as a tomb, or as the first step on a path towards something greater? The answer may forever lie beyond human sight. But in Joseph's story, we find a light that shines through the darkness, inviting us to believe in the impossible.